Hello, everyone. You're live with Chris and Jeff on Your Bytes, Your Rights, session 12, the DarkNet and data rights. Today we've got Jack Resider with us, and Jack is a former security engineer. He now hosts the renowned DarkNet Diaries. Jack is amazing at making cybersecurity interesting, at storytelling, and at finding insight and humanity in the story of pretty much every hack. He hosts the DarkNet Diaries, a podcast series that captures, preserves, and explains the culture around hacking and cybersecurity in order to educate and entertain both technical and non-technical audiences. So, welcome, Jack. How are you doing today?
Wow, thanks for having me. It's interesting you say that point out the stuff about humanity in the stories. I don't think anyone's described it as that, but I appreciate that because I really do look for that in there.
Yeah, that's sort of the way I think about your podcast. I hope other people see it that way as well. Chris, what are your thoughts about Jack's podcast?
Oh yeah, 100% agree. So Jeff turned me on to your podcast, Jack, about I want to say 3 months ago, and I binged on all of your episodes. Consequently, I listened to nothing else for like 2 weeks until I got to episode one, like working backwards from there. So no, it's really awesome because my takeaway was, and you can tell me if you see it differently, that a lot of times these quote unquote hackers got into hacking simply because they could, and which is also kind of my own experience. I was a hacker back before the dial-up days, really. But only due to like experiments. It's like, okay, what can I do here? And I was in charge of the university's network at the time to some extent. And so I'm like just poking at directories to see, oh, what is in this one? What is in this one? And so forth. And so not ever with any malicious intent, just kind of poking around to see what's possible, essentially. And that was kind of the message that I think came through a lot of the people that you interviewed.
hmm Yeah, and I think that's a valuable skill to have, even in the infosec industry, is just to have that curiosity of like, what if I push this button? What's going to happen?
Right.
And just to have the fearlessness of it. I think that kind of separates me from my grandma as well. Is I'm fearless of trying to push whatever button is on the screen. I don't mind. She is just like, petrified of like, oh, I could lose it all. I might not, I might not be able to get it back, and it could wreck the whole thing. And and she's got this like fear to it. But if you have that like fearlessness of, let's be curious and just push all the buttons and see what happens, then you'll get over that. And now you're in this experimental zone of just trying and exploring, and I think there's something magical about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exploring dark rooms. It's like,
Yeah, yeah. Jack, I was listening to a couple year older, not older, I guess, a couple episodes a little further back. Was actually listening to Dirty Comms, where you interviewed Drew just last night, and what an amazing episode where you talk about some of the exploits that younger hackers are doing on Roblox, and it just sort of struck me how crazy it is that young people are sort of pulled into this, and it seems to me that they're not really even doing this because they think that the stuff that they're doing is wrong. They're just doing it because they can.
Mm.
Any
Yeah,
thoughts
yeah,
on that?
they don't
Yeah.
really have that sense of something's wrong. When I think the thing is that you're on the other side of the screen, right? And when you're distanced, when you're able to hide behind your own screen, you don't have that sense of like, oh, I'm robbing someone right now, or I'm scamming someone, or I'm ripping them off. You don't have that face-to-face contact, and I think none of these kids would be able to do it in real life, to be able to just ask someone for a gift card and say, I'll check your balance for you, and then just take off and run with it. Like, nobody has that kind of guts. They wouldn't be able to like look back over their shoulder and see the person being crying and like, dude, you stole my money. So there is this feeling of like, behind the screen, it's just pushing buttons. And that's you talk about the humanity. That's the humanity of it. It's just a person pushing buttons on a computer. and those buttons they push could be the wrong sequence of buttons to land them in prison or rob a bank or steal stuff from people. Like, it's just buttons pushed at the right time. It's wild to think about that.
Yeah, yeah. That reminds me of Cam the Carter. That story from a much earlier episode, and how he sort of got pulled into the carding scam. It seemed to me that that's sort of a common theme in a lot of these folks. They sort of start doing something, and they get pulled into this vortex, and before you know, it seems like they're just pushing a couple buttons, and then eventually they're a criminal before they even realize that they were a criminal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't necessarily see it right away. And that's the interesting thing, right? If you walk by a building late at night and you see the windows open, and you could easily crawl in there and steal stuff and get out and nothing would be an issue. That's not a crime just to notice that you saw a window open, right? And so if go to a website and you see that it's vulnerable, that's not necessarily a crime, right? So you haven't really crossed any line yet. But what if you tell someone, hey, I saw this window open on this building? Is that a crime? Like, the line's still not clear, right? But if you told somebody who is like a known gang member of the town, like, oh, and wants to rob places, maybe that is a crime because now you're telling them of a way into a building. Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things that their line isn't always clear on where. I mean, especially as you're a teenager and you don't have all the reasoning skills yet, and you just see everyone online doing this sort of thing and they're getting away with it. The line isn't clear for them at all of like, where is this now illegal? And they just don't quite know. It's not clear.
Well, and that translates into a lot of our behavior, doesn't it? I mean, if you look at all the sort of hacking rules, even this story about I think it's the governor of Kansas who wants to prosecute a reporter for telling him that there was a vulnerability in his website,
Yeah,
and just reporting that, and now the governor wants to bring him up on hacking charges.
mm-hmm.
That seems pretty crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this case, I mean, that's an interesting story. We can get into that, where it's like the person who found the vulnerability was working at the newspaper that did not speak highly of the governor, and so the governor wanted to do something to retaliate against this newspaper. And clearly, this wasn't the best strategy, but it was something that he could totally stick their finger in their eye and bring them to court and make them spend, money on legal fees and all that sort of stuff. They know the governor knew he wasn't going to win, but he could absolutely file a frivolous lawsuit because the government can do that against people. And I think that's the real issue here, is that if the government wants to file a frivolous lawsuit, they can, and the judge can't just say, well, this is stupid, you're not going to win this, and throw it out. But if like you were to do the same thing to me and say, oh, Jack did this horrible thing that I think is horrible, but obviously there's no law behind it, and you brought that to me, I could just tell the judge, like, look, this is frivolous, please throw this out. The judge would be like, yeah, get out of here with this thing, right? So you can't bring another person to court for frivolous things, but the government can bring you to court for frivolous things. And that, I think that's the crux of that issue there. It has nothing really to do with what that journalist did. It was all about the government wanted to hurt that company, and this was their tool to do it. And it obviously they weren't going to win, but it was just the way that they were hiding behind that as the thing, and it made them look really stupid in the process.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. You're right. That was probably less about hacking than political retribution.
Yeah, and I do need to get that journalist on the phone and do an episode on that, because I think there is a humanity in that one for sure.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we wanted to do here was try to get to the root of the intersection of data rights and the darknet. And I guess that's a little bit of a slippery subject. A couple of the things that I sort of talked about in the post, sort of describing this episode, were, what's the difference between a hacker stealing your data and selling it to a criminal, and Clearview AI scraping it and selling it to cops?
Mm.
Is there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a clear difference there, right? One's used for nefarious criminal behavior and one's used for law enforcement. But let's make it a better example of harder to differentiate, right? So let's say we had China hacking um, Equifax and stealing 100 million American records,
Hmm.
and then we have a Chinese app called TikTok that's coming over in a big storm and getting all kinds of teenagers and adults to install and then collecting as much data off those people as possible. I mean, think of Facebook, how much data they have on you. TikTok has that same kind of data. I mean, they know everything that's going on in your life. So
Yeah.
I mean, if it like obviously TikTok is a company in China, it's not a Chinese government run operation, but in order for them to do so much business that they do in the US, I believe the government would have to give them a door through the firewall to say, okay, you can get to TikTok and it's all allowed. And if we're making deals like that, then you've got to give us some data. I mean, we want to find these dissidents, we want to find these activists that are anti-China, we want to I mean, whatever China's doing with collecting information off of hundreds of millions of Americans, right? So that I think is a difficult thing to differentiate between the Equifax breach and TikTok. What do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely agree. It's pretty unlikely that the Chinese government doesn't have access to TikTok's data, and probably Facebook's data as well, if they want to get access to it.
Yeah, they
In some
100% have it. They have all of it, and they're behind TikTok. 100%. That's how
yeah.
things work in China. That's pretty well known. But also, I think like this entire business model, Jeff and I talk about this a lot. What Facebook is essentially selling is not advertising, right? They are selling social engineering as a service, because obviously they don't care if you are an advertiser or if you just want to influence someone else's behavior for some other reason rather than buying a product or service. If your reason is that I want you to believe something, i.e., that you shouldn't vote, then they will readily sell those tools to whoever's paying for that. And to me, that's atrocious. I think all of Facebook's revenue should be considered ill-gotten gains, as far as I'm concerned, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess it didn't start out that way. And the thing I have about these like major social media companies is their original intent is nowhere near what they're doing now. And I think all these big platforms have just gotten so large, it's out of control. They simply can't delete all the bots off the platform ever. Like, Elon wants to do that to Twitter. Like, that's not going to happen. That's
Right.
what Twitter is doing right now. They're working their tail off to try to delete the bots off there, yet they just can't do it fast enough, and there's a big bot problem. It's gonna when you get to a certain size, it just becomes completely unmanageable. You can't take down all the content on there that is being reported as scams, as illegal content and stuff fast enough than when it's getting on there, because it's just so massive when you have hundreds of millions of users all uploading content at the same moment. How in the world are you going to moderate that? It's impossible. And so it's out of control in every way. And it does have these, and this is the funny thing is, when did you first notice that Facebook was an evil company? Because for the first few years it didn't seem like that. It seemed innocent. It just seemed like you get on there and you share with your friends, and that's fine. It's only at a certain size. It only after it becomes a certain amount of influence. It only after a certain amount of problems, and we don't know those problems in the first few years. And that's what's fascinating about tech is, like, I like crypto, but how is crypto going to change our world in the next 10 or 20 years? It might be an absolute disaster. But now it seems like, oh, this is a great idea. And so it's hard for me to get behind certain products or ideas without having that long-term vision of, like, yeah, that's going to be really bad later on. And I wish I had that foresight, but I just don't.
Yeah. I mean, what we're seeing in crypto right now is a misunderstanding of the paradigm shift because of the original title of the Bitcoin white paper. People think it has to do with cash and cryptocurrencies, which was a terrible moniker, still is, because the paradigm that the Bitcoin white paper really just introduced is that you have complete control over a set of bytes and can hand over that control to a third party. So moving control over a set of bytes from A to B without needing a middleman, without needing a database. From where I'm sitting is the problem that perpetrates all of these solutions that we're using today is twofold. One is simply legacy technology, let's call it database solutions, and then with that, it's the fact that some individuals and entities control these databases. As you know, most of hacking is really social engineering, depending on what numbers you're using, is anywhere between 70% to 98%. Right, so the only way to mitigate that is to not give a third party control over the set of bytes. So that's why my thesis is that we actually are in the process of reversing the topology of the web itself to where we only work on mapped cryptographic primitives, and anything else that's out there is essentially an unauthorized copy, which is specifically important if and when and where we are starting to issue new government credentials that are digitally native. So in that case of like a digital driver's license, what you really only want to hand over at any given point in time is basically a green check mark that you can do what you want to do, rather than what we're doing now is creating copies of copies of copies. Anyway, sorry for the little rant. I'm proud to that.
Yeah, you've got some good points there, but what I want to warn you about is like, what are those unforeseen things that we just haven't considered yet that could make all that just absolutely a garbage fire?
Yeah.
And those things could be, well, if we digitize everything and then China wants to steal it all, well, now all your driver's license are on the blockchain, it's easy to grab them all or whatever, right? Like there could be some really bad things that happen from going that path, and we can't see that yet. And then when we get there, we're like, oh man, all this whole blockchain should just be ill-gotten gains, and it's absolutely horrible, and we could just totally flip on it. And that's what's fun about technology, is it's changing so rapidly.
Yeah, and I think by and large, again, it's just people don't understand the nuances of technology. Like even blockchain are just one example of decentralized software solutions. I think the more important ones are probably directed acyclic graphs. It's probably not something we want to talk about on this particular show. It's too nerdy. But again, it comes down to that if you have a control over a set of bytes, it should invalidate all the copies. Because if you, Jack, are at a particular location at a particular time, then anybody else kind of using that particular instrument should be invalidated. And this metaphor that we typically offer for that is the introduction of primitives that existed before database and digital solutions, i.e. your physical passport. You would take it out of your drawer, you leave the house, take it to an airport, you show it to the border agent, he gives it back to you, put it in your pocket. So if we had this particular model in a digital world, then for anybody to use this particular instrument, they would have to actually break into your house, so to speak. So you would be the sole custodian. And so I call this kind of the do not call list on all your personal identifiable data.
Good
Yeah.
stuff.
Absolutely. It does seem to me that Jack has a point about unforeseen consequences of any technology. But maybe it does. Maybe we should talk a little bit about the TerraLuna sort of disaster that just happened. Does that make any sense at all?
Well,
Or is that too technical?
I haven't like flipped it over and looked at it front to cover yet, but it is a wild story that I just kind of, I mean, what I do is I've looked at these charts and I've just been like, my jaws open, like something horrible has happened here, and I don't even understand, but I can tell like this is unprecedented.
Yeah, it definitely is. Well, let's skip that for now because I think you're right. It's still a developing story, and all the facts aren't in yet. So maybe we'll skip that for now.
Yeah, our financial engineers internally already analyzed that. It's pretty clear to us what happened. I mean, it's a form of hack, but it's a financial hack. So someone saw a vulnerability in the market setup and exploited it. Yeah. Again, we probably don't want to talk on this particular show about that, but to people who are financial engineers and have data analysts at their disposal, like we, it was pretty obvious what happened there and was kind of almost expected because of that particular setup. But you had to deploy a significant amount of resources to pull that off.
Let's talk a little bit more about the hacking mindset. Um, are, is hacking more about challenging the system, about proving technical and social engineering skills, about exposing poor security, or is it just about the money, Jack?
I mean, I think to define the hacker, it's just somebody who has hit some sort of roadblock and finds a way around it that's not the path that you're supposed to take, perhaps, right? So it's I mean, it's overcoming an obstacle, really. That's what a hacker is. It's making your software do things that is saying, no, you can't do that. Okay, well, I'm going to make you do that. So I'm going to find a way around, that kind of thing. And so the hacker mindset is just having that resilience, that persistence, wanting to complete this task, even though that task seems like it's not possible, and finding ways to do it. And I think there's a level of curiosity there. Yeah, curiosity and persistence, I think, are the two biggest things that go into the hacker mindset.
So, are these the guys that we should be hiring to build Web3, or are they untrustable?
Well, hackers definitely. I don't have any bad connotation for the word hacker. I think we're all hackers. I mean, you can even look at, what's that one website, Hackaday or something like that? No, it's Life Hacks, right? So I mean, this is in a common vernacular. You'll see everyone, even soccer moms, saying, "Oh, I hacked the menu at the grocery store the other day," right? Like, you didn't hack the menu. In my world of the way you hack things, but okay, whatever, because we got a few extra dollars off of, if you order the meal this way instead of like that, when you add 2 sides instead of, then you get an extra dollar worth of food. Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, I like people who can hit these obstacles and say, that doesn't faze me, I'm going to continue moving forward, and I'm just going to act like this isn't even here. and knock down walls, break through, and that's how we have technology breakthroughs, right? Is these people who are hackers that are just saying, that's the way we've always done it. Well, I don't see it that way, I see it as a different way. Let's do it a new way. And well, that's not possible. Watch me, I'll do it. But I think what you're wondering is, well, what about criminal cybercrime, people who are hacking for ill-gotten gains or whatever? Yeah, I mean, it depends on what your business is. Like, if you have a cryptocurrency company, you're probably not going to want to hire somebody who's a known SIM swapper that loves stealing crypto and is going to prison for stealing crypto. And now you're going to, oh yeah, here's where we keep our hot wallet and stuff. Like, this is probably not something you want to do. But yeah, I mean, if somebody was a teenager and they hacked some stuff on a video game when they were young and they got in trouble for maybe changing the grades at their school, then you know what? They've cut their teeth on this world. They know their chops. They understand the ins and outs of where security weaknesses are and could possibly point them out. So putting them in the corporate world could be very beneficial to you, because they were curious about this and persistent about this particular thing, cybersecurity, way before they got any education on it. And so these people have sometimes a head start on the whole thing. So yeah, I mean, it could really work out in your favor to hire some cyber criminals.
That's really interesting. I think that question is going to really be an interesting one as we move forward in this economy. That's really interesting. Because, I mean, really, where do you draw the line? The more people experiment, as you sort of pointed out, right, the more likely they are to cross lines that they probably shouldn't. But if they're not crossing those lines, how do they really get to be good at what they need to be good at, right? If you haven't asked those questions in your head, if you haven't crossed those lines, you're probably not developing your skills. And yet, if you haven't developed those skills, how do you really get to be the best that you can be? I mean, you can
Yeah.
call yourself, you're the red team or whatever, um, or you're a white hat hacker. But if you haven't really experienced the dark side, have you really done everything you can to build your skills?
Well, clearly you can. Yes, you can build out labs and you can study and you can take training and everything can be completely legit and above board, and you could still be a very sharp hacker. But what I worry is that the lab environments are slowly getting out of reach, right? So when I was young, I used to go to the thrift store and buy like $35 worth of computer parts and put together a Linux computer, a horrible, stupid looking one that wasn't even like, put together right. And that was my lab, right? It was right, nice and cheap and easy to assemble and stuff like that. Um, and then when I got into network engineering, I was able to buy some used Cisco equipment for $5 or $10 each, and that was fine. But um, and then we had VMware, which kind of made things more exciting. You could just virtualize a lot of these systems. You didn't even have to buy the hardware, and then you can act like, oh, I can spin up a Windows AD server or something here, or a Linux server, and that was fun. But now a lot of stuff is going to the cloud. And so if you want to pen test an AWS instance or an Azure instance, this isn't something you could go get at the thrift store or just spin up in VMware. This is something you have to sort of pay for at their website. And then do you really have the permission to hack at it and try to like exploit it and stuff? I mean, you're literally hacking AWS's website at that point. Yeah, it's your container or your instance, whatever you've got there, but it starts blurring the line of like what's allowed and what's not allowed. And yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, so Microsoft 365 is another thing, right? We used to be able to run our own Exchange servers in a VMware, but now this is completely going to Office 365. So now it's all online. And how do you get to practice that? Where's your lab for that? Do they even offer that for free for some 13-year-old who just wants to screw around with it?
Yep. Yeah. And is it configured the way, are you able to configure it the way somebody else is going to configure it, right?
Yeah, exactly. You got to set it up. So this is where maybe the live fire simulation isn't available, and now you've got to just work on something in the real world. And I wonder how that dynamic is going to play out, where you don't have access to this lab equipment as much, and so now you're just pinging at some actual equipment out there.
That sort of leads me into a little bit of a different question. So, are hackers more supportive? The people that are playing around on the dark web, are they actually more supportive of privacy and data rights? Certainly, they're more aware of them, right, than the average citizen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I mean, they want to be subversive, right? They want to buy things with money that can't be traced back to them. They want to get that shipped to them in a way that's not directly to them. And they want to, buy and sell and interact and do trade and business all online in this sort of private manner. And so that's why they use the dark web to do that, and cryptocurrency and stuff. So they can, do all that. So I think they do have a strong respect for privacy and demand for it and need for it in order to conduct their business on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I think of the dark web really as the real web. So I think what the population uses by and large is what I would call the commercial web, right? So that, because when you're on Google, you're not really on the web. You're just a non-player character in a game called Google. Same on Facebook and so forth. Larger point there being, though, is that as we are in the process of kind of fixing these centralization points, we're basically also protecting the endpoints. And I always see endpoints as the human beings, as in technology and software should serve the human beings. And if you think of people specifically, they who cannot use digital technologies or cannot use it freely because they live under authoritarian governments that use these technologies to oppress their citizens, and if they find out about certain behaviors, disappear them, then at that point in time you also realize as a developer, it's like you want to develop technologies with these type of people in mind. As in, can a person, a dissident in the Middle East, for example, use their technologies and not expose himself or herself to this kind of danger? So that's kind of how I think about technology.
Chris, I always love when you talk about how, using the commercial web, what we think of as the web, uh, people are really more like non-player characters. That's a really great sort of analogy. But I haven't ever actually thought about the dark web as being the real web. Um, that's actually a pretty great analogy as well. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's this iceberg picture that you've probably all seen at some point in time, right?
Yeah. Um, and I really appreciate, Jack, the way you sort of characterize hackers as being much more concerned about privacy. I get that sense too, because they're trying to protect their privacy. Maybe it's for nefarious reasons, to some extent, right? Or at least some of the users. Um, but I think you're right. And maybe that's, can we use that? Is there a way to use all of this concern for privacy on the dark web by this subgroup of people to advance privacy rights for all of us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does. Um, you've got you've got a lot of this stuff that is, people. I mean, one of the reasons why Bitcoin is popular is because it's got this privacy kind of, yeah, it's kind of decoupled from the system, and it's got privacy built into it. And so, this is the thing I've heard on my show. It's like some criminals got into Bitcoin because, wow, this is perfect for, buying and trading on the dark web. I'm into this. And they were making money, and then they were just changing it for cash and saying, okay, that was cool. It's a nice tool to use that. But then after like doing that for years, they're like, wait a minute, this has a lot of potential. This is gonna change the world. And so they decided, instead of changing it for cash, let's just hold it. And sure enough, those people who had that sort of understanding that the usefulness of it was just so great that they went on to become millionaires in some situations, because they started out as criminals and ended up as just investors and becoming millionaires.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I think some of that stuff does trickle through, right? They use PGP keys on the dark web, and they have other things that I think have come into the rest of the world.
That's really interesting. Hey, we've got Chris Glendon with us, who I want to bring on stage and add him to the conversation as well. Chris, can you uh, request to be heard, and then I can pull you on stage?
All
I
right.
think you're still with us there. Hopefully you are. We can go ahead and there he is,
There he is. Okay.
allowed to speak.
Public service announcement. Don't use Bitcoin for any criminal activity. It's a terrible tool, by the way, to do criminal activity, because it's not anonymous whatsoever anymore. The herd immunity of that chain is long gone. I call herd immunity something where you do not attach any personal identifiable data to an immutable record, which should be obvious to anybody using technologies. It's actually very, very hard to stay anonymous.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it bears saying that just because you go on the dark web and just because you buy stuff with cryptocurrency doesn't mean you're anonymous. It may be harder for you to be found, but unless you're very very careful with how you do it, people can still find you, and it's very hard to keep the government from knowing what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's just incredibly hard. If they really want to find you, they're gonna
Oh yeah.
probably find you.
All
You
the
know,
three-letter agencies love when you use crypto for your crimes because they have all the time in the world to find you.
right? It may not be easy, but they can find you.
They're
All
on it.
right. So hey, we brought Chris Glendon from Barcode up. Jack, do you and Chris know each other?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, Jack. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm in the presence of three living legends here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, glad to have you, Chris Glendon. Why
Absolutely.
don't you introduce yourself and give us a little commentary on what we're talking about here?
Yeah. So, Chris Glendon, I currently run and host the Barcode podcast, and we always get into certain topics, just like what we're talking about today. Um, I'll address that last question about the support of privacy and data rights over the average citizen. And in from my perspective, the key word there is supportive. So when I think support, I'd like to give the average citizen more credit than not having any knowledge. And generally, I think in today's world, the average citizen is more cognizant of their privacy and data rights. Um, and in our industry, in the security industry, I think we have overall done a better job in recent years with stressing the importance outside of our industry to the average citizen. And and I know we can get into this, but rapid and emerging technologies like AR, VR, and those type of things in terms of privacy and data rights, they're more in the face of the average citizen now, and as a consumer. And I don't think that you can approach any tech like that and not have concerns. So I think the average citizen is aware and would ultimately like to support it more, but maybe not know how to do that. And I think that is where we need to focus.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think I think we want there to be privacy in our technology. Like we want to me, I always say, oh, privacy is the number one concern I have when I'm buying a new piece of technology, phone or whatever. But the, but it never is the case. It's always ease of use, and I like having maps available. And yeah, the map software tracks where I am and tells other people like, oh, there's congestion on this road, don't go there. And I like having apps and other things that those apps track me and those kind of things. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll take that accepted risk. But yeah, I do think that there's going to be some sort of new generation that wakes up to this and says, "Oh hell no, I don't want any of this stuff. This is absolutely unacceptable," because there'll just be too much. I don't know. Some sort of problem will just be so apparent to some generation that's like, this is not acceptable. I almost equate it to like in the '90s there were a lot of environmental disasters, and we didn't quite, we woke up in the '90s and be like, oh man, we're really wrecking this place. We need to we need to put some more safety features here, and putting that genie back in the bottle, try to get things under control in the environmental disasters was really hard. And I think that's what we're going to have to do with our privacy at some point, is like wake up and say, okay, we made some big mistakes here. We should not have given this much permission, and we need to get this pulled back. And I think that's going to take decades to get it back in the bottle.
Yeah. So that's why Jeff and I refer to the current World Wide Web as the digital landfill. So it's not really the World Wide Web.
I think you're right, Jack. And my take on that is that people keep saying that let the marketplace sort of fix that problem. But the real problem is that there aren't any good alternatives to Google Maps. Because there's Google, and there's then maybe three or four smaller options that probably are going to still track you. So there aren't any privacy enhancing map solutions that we can turn to. And if you look at like Facebook, right? So show me a social network that has all my friends on it where I can, talk with them and network with them that isn't going to sell all my data. I mean, there aren't any. I mean, there are some privacy enhancing social networks, but nobody's on them. And so the real key here is that we need a way to have more competitors in these spaces uh, before people can actually choose an option that makes sense. It's not that people don't want privacy; it's that they don't have the real option to have that convenience and privacy at the same time, and that's the problem.
Yeah, I agree.
So how do we enable that? We have to either increase competition, or we have to increase privacy laws, or we have to get people to a point where they say, "Sorry, I'm not going to use maps because my location is too important to me."
I think increasing competition is a good start with with having a phone. I mean, today you have two options. You have Android and Google, or Apple and Android phones, and it's like you could go in any phone store in the U.S. and those are the only two options you're going to have. Um, there's no privacy phones available in any of the stores, right? And these things do exist, but they have, but they're, I don't know. They don't have the features that I need or something. I do feel like I need to review them more in order to really know what I'm talking about in this situation. But I think some good. I mean, when I log into my bank gives me an ad. It says, "Hey, do you want to open a loan?" When I log into PayPal, PayPal gives me an ad. "Hey, do you want a credit card?" Like, I really need alternatives to all this stuff because I cannot. And when I go to YouTube, it's like gives me two ads just before I watch a video, and I'm like, where are all the competitions? Because anyone who's competing against this is gonna just blow this out of the water. Because like if you treat me as an adult with kind and loving, like here we want to protect your security and privacy, and we don't want to like flood you with ads and all this kind of stuff. And this is how we're going to build this, and they're going to win at the end of the day, I think. But for some reason, it's just not, and I don't know why.
It's
Yeah,
not intuitive for the average user. I mean, security professionals, we understand this and we can see it, but when we take ourselves out of this zone, not everybody else is going to see things that way, and it needs to be more consumer friendly, I think.
yeah,
Yeah, I think also this kind of idea of privacy is kind of the wrong framing because people are so indoctrinated into just checking the box about whatever privacy policy a website has. And also, if you think about these kind of naive requests of GDPR or CCPA here in California of the right to be forgotten, obviously anything that you digitally observe, you don't really forget. And the correct demand, in my opinion, is really, as a human being, you have the unalienable right not to be observed because even observation is already changing behavior, specifically if you live under less friendly governments than our own here, right?
yeah. One thing that's related to this that I'd really like to do some more research on is I've seen a lot more people, especially sort of people in the privacy arena, say that contextual advertising is just as effective as behavioral advertising. And I don't know if everyone here knows the difference there, but contextual ads are essentially ads that pop up when you search for a bicycle. It'll show you ads for bicycles, and behavioral ads are more like you search for bicycles and you get a retargeted ad for luggage that you searched for 3 weeks ago because they think you still want to go traveling. Um, and maybe you still want that, but maybe you don't. So obviously contextual ads can be pretty powerful, but what I really wonder is it true that contextual ads are just as profitable and efficient as behavioral advertising? We've been pretty much sold a bill of goods that behavioral advertising is the way things have to work by people that profit from behavioral advertising. But is that true? There's a lot of statistics that all of this behavioral advertising ad tech model just adds a whole lot of middlemen and eats up a whole lot of money. And there's a whole lot of ad fraud in there as well. And maybe it's not actually doing anything for us other than taking our privacy away.
I think it depends on the medium, right? So, DuckDuckGo does contextual ads. It's a search engine, just like
Yeah.
Google, and Google does behavioral ads. It looks to see what you probably are interested in to serve you things that you'd like the most. And so DuckDuckGo, I mean, Gabriel Weinberg, who runs that, is always saying like, oh, it's just as effective. You don't need to know that this person's interested in bicycles when they search for bicycles. You see it right there. So give them an ad for that. But what we see is much more nefarious behavior on the ad companies, such as if you go into Target and you buy something with your credit card, they're going to store your name and your purchase history in a database that says, okay, this person just bought this. You don't need to have a Target account or anything like that. They know exactly what you just bought. And every time you come in, they know which store you're going to, what items you're buying, and this kind of thing. And they've got these sort of algorithms that when you buy certain things like unscented lotion and unscented soaps, then and some I can't remember some of the other indicators, but their algorithm says, this person may be pregnant because now their sense of smell is too much for them, and something's going on, and so then they start sending you coupons in the mail for your upcoming baby. And a lot of times they're right, that person is pregnant. And so now people are getting these coupons just specifically for the thing that's going on in their life. And this gets really creepy in my head. Of these companies are watching, some of them are even watching where you go in the store and track your cell phone, because it is beaconing out and doing all kinds of signals and connections. And they have things in the store that tells you how long, that can sense how long you've stood in front of this particular advertisement or a section of the store or something to see that what you're interested in, and then send you ads based on that in the mail. I mean, it knows where you live. They know everything about you. And when there's a database that knows so much stuff about you, and that gets leaked onto a criminal website or stolen by China or something like that, it can be really hard. It be really bad for people to be able to recover from something like that. It's horrible.
Yeah.
It's also
terrible. Go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just going to say it's also interesting to think about the chain that's behind that too, with organization to organization or store to store, what type of informational sharing is going on as well, and database collaboration, because that just expands everything beyond that limited scope that one place may have. How many of these merchants work together with each other, data share with each other, and it gets scary.
Yeah, that's just it. There's these data brokers that are sharing all this data and collecting it from all these places and then selling it to places that want to advertise to their customers and stuff. There was a recent John Oliver video about this, I think.
Yeah, the data definitely proliferates and grows, and they make inferences, and a lot of the data accuracy starts to decrease, which can cause problems. But one of the things that I think is interesting is that while those behavioral ads can be valuable, and can be right, if you're getting ads for sailboats and diapers, because they're behavioral ads, it pushes out the ability for the guy who wants to sell you bicycles when you're searching for bicycles. And so, if we were only doing behavioral ads, could that actually be just as valuable as everybody trying to fight over behavioral ads and give you, ads for behaviors instead of the contextual ads? So I think it's hard to judge whether or not contextual ads would be just as valuable as behavioral, because behavioral ads push everything out of the way.
Yeah, and this might transcend into other territories that I think I get scared of. Like, for instance, if you Google a certain thing, Google's going to tell you what it thinks is the best, number one option for you, right? And that might not always be what you're looking for. So they have a lot of influence on where they're going to stick you. and that's interesting. But then you've got browsers too. I've seen this situation where somebody would type in a website and the browser would automatically redirect them to a different site because they think that's the more appropriate website for you to go to. That's the one you were probably looking for. And I remember, I don't remember the name of the site, but there was a person who owned a specific website, and every time they typed it into Firefox, I believe, Firefox just moved them to a different site. And it was like, you can't get to my website on your browser. That's crazy. And
Now,
so,
Jack, do you
yeah,
think it's Firefox redirecting, or you think it's that organization redirecting?
I think it was Firefox doing it. I'm
Okay.
not sure if it was Firefox specifically, but the browser itself was doing it, and I think there was something where it was so close. It was one letter off from the actual website, and it was just saying, "Yeah, I think this is the one you wanted." And it might have been like autocomplete or something. I didn't look into the story too much, but yeah, I mean that's scary. Is when the browsers take control over where you're trying to go, and search engines take control of where you're trying to go, and they just say, "Here's where you need to go. Stop trying to go to those other places." And for me, when I'm researching things and I want specific like give me the congressional testimony from 2014 that had this particular thing. I don't want them to say, oh, we had someone on Fox and Friends talked about that. You should go there first. Like, that's not what I want. I want the actual testimony. It's on Congress's website somewhere. Where is it? Show me that. No. We've got this pundit who said something about it. And it drives me insane when I can't get to where I'm looking for a specific thing, publication 49276. Like, oh, there's a podcast where somebody talked about that. No.
Well, that's because we don't really have search engines today, right? So Google is an advertising company, or social engineering as a service company posing as a search engine. But if you just do this experiment right now, you go to google.com and you punch just in one letter into it, your top of funnel. I just punched in D, and the first result is Domino's. I haven't bought a pizza at Domino's or bought something at Domino's in my life. Right, so it's not actually suggesting something that's relevant to me, but that's relevant to them, as in it's more likely that they're going to make revenue from the traffic. So I'm simply top of funnel as soon as I put any letter into that particular box. It's not a search. I'm running a query against the advertising index, essentially.
Yeah, it makes me want to build some sort of tool to be able to look at the internet like the way a computer would, where I can just spider to where I need to go, cross-reference six like terms and say where are the websites on here that talk about that point to these things or are sourced from these things. It would be really nice to have this sort of vision into the internet or into social media or any sort of website that I could just like use it as an API and not so much as
Right.
a
Yeah.
their.
I mean, ultimately, we need to reverse the paradigm. Right now, we are under this, broadly speaking, push paradigm. We need to turn this into a pull paradigm, right? To make it most useful for you to pull in that information. So we're actually monitoring the development of an engine like this right now. So, and if and when this becomes live, which is probably next year, this is going to displace Google, and no one should be using Google afterwards.
When what becomes live?
Or that particular search engine, or this particular indexation tool that I was referring to, because it's specifically designed around you. Think about it from the perspective as you having your personal Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
So, guys, let's try to bring this sort of to a close. I've got a question for everybody here on stage. So, obviously, there's risks from people hacking, identity theft, and criminals just stealing your money outright. But we've also got a threat from surveillance capitalism. Which of those threats is more of a problem for us right now? What should we really be focusing our attention on?
I can answer that first if you want.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Chris.
So, and I'll be quick. So it's an interesting perspective. I think, I think they both tie for last place, right? It's if you look at, in a ransomware attack, right? The attackers or the hackers. I hate to say hackers versus cyber criminals. I prefer cyber criminals. They at least offer you an option to purchase your data back or possibly purchase your data back. Um, and is it too extreme to think that surveillance capitalism might offer the same benefit one day? Like pay us X Bitcoin, and we'll remove your biometric data from our database. I mean, I can definitely see that happening.
There is a data broker right now that is actually also acting as a privacy agent, and you can pay them to remove your data.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, Chris. Any thoughts on that question, Jack?
No, I'm not really sure which one I'd focus on first. I'm stuck on that one.
Yeah, obviously they're both big problems, and it's a rhetorical question at best. Um, there's no real answer, obviously. They're both big issues. But it does seem to me that we spend a lot of time, at least in the media, focused on cyber criminals and hacks and these kinds of things, and not necessarily a whole lot of time focusing on surveillance capitalism and some of the problems that we really have an issue with in privacy rights. Probably in part because there's a whole lot of lobbying from big tech and from data brokers.
Yeah, I think somebody who's doing some good work there is the EFF. They've taken on the what is it, spouseware, domestic spyware apps that people can install on their phone, and so you can track where your family member is and see exactly where they're at and stuff like this. Well, these apps are being used for nefarious ways. You can spy and see exactly where someone is, and it doesn't, like, EFF has gotten a lot of these apps kicked out of the app stores because they're not clear on showing people, like, it's basically malware. It's basically spyware that people are installing in order to enable, what's happening is that it's being abused by like ex-husbands and ex-coworkers and stuff like this that shouldn't have that app installed on that person's phone and be able to see what's going on there and stuff like that. And so it becomes very dangerous. And yeah, they're doing good work getting rid of the dangerous ones out of the app stores.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, location is becoming something that people are much more aware of. I mean, even the Apple tags, what are those called?
Air tags.
Yeah, the air tags, right? Like the tile trackers are becoming problematic. I mean, I see news stories about them about once a week about people getting tagged and having issues with that. Not like the product's probably going to go away, but people are getting more aware that location tagging is a problem.
Yeah, it could be a very big problem for like domestic abuse.
Sure. All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Chris, do you want to wrap us up?
All right. Yeah, maybe for everybody who hasn't heard this type of data yet, to repeat that, if you have never listened to this, last year externalities from cybercrime exceeded $6 trillion, which is larger than the GDP of Germany as a frame of reference. And there is a cyber breach of sorts in the United States affecting a company in the United States almost every hour, costing it a few $1 million. So it's a real problem. And again, by and large, in my estimation, it's based on legacy technology and people who have access to that legacy technology deploying that without knowing what they're doing. And I think there's a lot of business models that we are not seeing that can actually be developed to actually make money from that, right? From these insecurities, rather than what's happening now, where we have this kind of surveillance capitalism state. We need to do the opposite, right? So .com initially was developed for commercial content to live. As far as I'm concerned, that's the only level it should live. And as far as I'm concerned, social engineering as a service and or advertising doesn't have a place at all on the World Wide Web. It should live on the commercial web. If you want to go there, just like you would want to go to a shopping mall to do window shopping and buy something, you should be able to go there. But it should be clear that you're leaving the realm of reality, because that's actually the real problem. We have splintered reality. We talked about the splinternet back in '97 already, and today it's more true than ever. But the unfortunate externalities of that, and we can witness this in real time now, is that we polarize the population to where if you want to believe something obscure like the world is flat, you can do so, or if you believe that other peoples are others and deserve to die, you can believe that too, because you can surround yourself with people who believe supposedly the exact same thing, and those people sometimes might actually not be people at all. They might be just bots, and that radicalize you into doing something that you wouldn't otherwise not be doing if the system didn't exist. End of sermon.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody. Jack and Chris, thanks so much for your time and for your insights. And this has been session 12 of Your Bytes, Your Rights.
Yeah, and everybody subscribe to Jack's and Chris's podcast. They're awesome.
Yeah, they're both great. Oh, wonderful. Thanks, everyone, and hope you have a great day and a great weekend.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Take care.